the teams in this debate are agreed on one thing. Everyone agrees that democracy is important and that it's important to promote democracy. We, in closing opposition, would say we have a problem though, in that, firstly, this isn't truly democratic because it means that people aren't represented properly. That's my first point of extension. Secondly, I'm going to tell you about the kind of obligations that government has to us and how this negatively affects government's ability to properly deliver on its mandate towards its people, right? And that's how this negatively affects democracy. Before I move on to that, let me get on to a few issues of rebuttal. So, the previous speaker tells us that there'd be no complaints about the Constitution, and thus, well, it's okay, we don't need a change. Well, firstly, this implies that if there was a complaint, then she'd be fine with us changing it. Well, ma'am, there was a complaint. There was a complaint about the property rights issue in the Constitution and the fact that you have to pay people who'd initially stolen the land from the people. There's been a complaint, you're satisfied, we can change the Constitution on your basis. Right, move on. Secondly, just because there hasn't been a complaint is not a reason why, it's not a reason to say that there won't be one in future, right? So, like, their analysis completely misses that there might be problems that arise in the future that might lead to a complaint about a constitution and the fact that it doesn't represent its people properly. We think that they miss that on their side of the house, that complaints might still arise even if there hadn't been a complaint up until yet. It's not a reason to change the constitution. So they tell us that they want to change, well, they want to cast the constitution in stone to prevent dictatorships. Well, we say you don't need to cast the constitution in stone in order to prevent a dictatorship, right? You'd say we haven't had a dictatorship in America, right? And they've had their constitution, which isn't cast in stone for years now. Even in South Africa, we are nowhere near getting a dictatorship, right? Just because the constitution is not cast in stone does not mean that we will get it does not mean that, well, we'll all of a sudden have dictatorship, right? And this does away with all the other stuff they spoke about the breakdown of services and all those things. So those things won't necessarily happen, right? So let's get on to our extension. So we say that democracy is a system where people are represented adequately by the people in government, right? So we say that the way in which government represents us, and more so the legislature, is their ability to make laws and make changes to the law that fits our society and the protection we need. Go jump in a lake, right? So what we would say is that often these changes are made in response to problems that exist in society at the time, right? So we'd say that the problem on their side of the house is that they try to go to a constitutional democracy, but they go to a constitutional dictatorship, right? Where the constitution holds the government hostage to the extent that it's not adequately able to represent its people, whether it's in terms of services that are given, whether it's in terms of the laws that it needs to enact. We'd say that this often leads to a disrespect for the Constitution and a devaluation of the Constitution. We'd say on our side of the house that if you ever want a Constitution to be properly effective in terms of the way that it governs your country, you need to maintain respect for it. You don't maintain respect on their side of the house, where the Constitution holds the government ransom to the extent that it can't properly deliver services to its people. And that's what they miss on the side of the house. That is not a democratic system, and it's not the kind of system that we need in our country, especially if you guys are so worried about people respecting the Constitution and the way in which it represents us, right? So we'd say that that's completely false. So we'd say, secondly, right, what exists in society is what you call a social contract, right? So you vote for government, and you give up certain rights to government, right? And in exchange, government gives you certain protections and such under the law, right? We'd say that there's a problem in that a lot of these protections that you might need at a later stage might be ingrained things that might need to underlie your whole legal system, right? We'd say when this happens, you can't do it through normal acts of law, which I assume is how you guys would have government do it in the absence of them being able to change the Constitution. Because when they do it with normal acts of law, right, it's like the Constitution is superior to other laws, and you can then bind other laws. But when they do it through normal acts, it's unable to bind other laws, and the state is unable to get that whole representative system or that whole interest protected across the spectrum, and they can only get it protected within a limited number of effects. And even that might be flawed in itself, because then it doesn't form a basis of the legal system as it would if you've been able to change the Constitution, put that interest that you want to protect on behalf of the people within the Constitution. We say this is a big problem on their side of the house, right? So we say that the Constitution So we'd say that the Constitution needs to have this kind of superior, well, you need to put this in the Constitution, which has a superior status, so that it best represents the people within the country, right? We'd say that you don't get this on your side of the house. Pyongyang talk information? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, okay, fine. So, right, so we'd say that this is a big problem, right? Because you severely undercut government's ability or responsibility to represent us, right? So we'd say that in a constitutional system or in a democracy, which you guys in government are so worried about, right? The most important thing for a constitution to do is to be able to aid the government in representing its people in terms of giving services, right? Where you have the constitution being we have it being a stone wall in order to prevent government from delivering service to the people. You say that you're not supporting the notion of democracy in that your government should represent us, and you're not supporting the Constitution's role in giving effective representation to its people and effective protection to its people, right? We say that this is a big problem. Right? Especially where you might find in certain instances, like for instance, you might need to give institutions, constitutional protecting institutions like the public protector, sufficiently more independence so that they're able to investigate corruption. You're unable to do things like that, where you're unable to change the Constitution, because the Constitution is now stuck in stone, and you can never change it, and you can never move it. So, Mr. Speaker, why is it that closing opposition has already won this debate, even before my partners come up to speak? Well, we tell you that the primary interest that they wanted to protect on their side of the house was democracy. We'd say that that was completely flawed, because they failed to take into account the way in which the Constitution aids in government representing its people, and in the way in which the Constitution aids in the government helping the government give services to its people. We'd say it's that's for that reason that we're proud to oppose